By Saturday night, the streets of Igboho were full of people singing. Phones were out, videos were rolling, and the story moving across Nigerian social media was simple. A pregnant woman, her children, and her sibling, kidnapped in the dead of night, were free. Free, the videos said, because one man gave their captors 2 hours to let them go. By Sunday afternoon, the Oyo State Police Command said something very different. The victims were never released at all. So which is it? Did a viral ultimatum actually force kidnappers to stand down, or did an entire town celebrate a rescue that never happened? And if it's the second one, what does that tell us about who Nigerians trust to keep them safe? The state or the man with a phone and a following? We're going to walk through exactly what's confirmed, what's disputed, and why this particular confusion matters far beyond one community in Oyo State. Before we go further, if you're new here, welcome. Naija Inside Desk exists to take you past the headline and the noise into what's actually verifiable. Subscribe now, because this one has more layers than the viral clip suggests. The story begins on the night of June 16, when armed men stormed a residence in Igbope in the Oorelope local government area of Oyo State and abducted members of a family during a midnight raid. Police later identified 2 of the victims as Mrs. Kuburat Omowumi and her son. Multiple local reports describe additional victims, a sibling and other children, though the exact number in captivity has not been consistently confirmed across sources. The kidnappers' demand started at 150 million naira above where it ended, an opening ask of 300 million naira, talked down to 150 million naira. Somewhere in that negotiation, according to claims made by Yoruba Nation activist Sunday Adeyemo, popularly known as Sunday Igboho, a pregnant woman among the captives and the person who delivered an earlier ransom payment were killed. That claim has not been independently verified by police at the time of this recording, and we want to be precise about that distinction. This is Igboho's account of events, not a confirmed police finding. 4 days after the abduction, on Saturday, Igboho convened Fulani community leaders and security officials at the palace of the Alepata of Igboho land, Oba Joel Olawuwo. Speaking in Yoruba, in a meeting that was filmed and quickly went viral, he accused members of the local Fulani community of harboring or directing the kidnappers and gave them a 2-hour deadline to produce the remaining captives without any ransom being paid. Why now, and why this format? Igboho is not a serving official. He has no statutory authority over a kidnapping investigation. What he has is reach, local legitimacy as an indigene of the town, and a documented history of positioning himself as a community enforcer in southwest Nigeria's security vacuum. That combination, credibility plus virality, is exactly why what happened next matters so much, regardless of which version of events turns out to be true. Here is where this story stops being a local drama and becomes a national one. On paper, the chain of authority over a kidnapping in Oyo State is not ambiguous. The Nigeria Police Force, through the Oyo State Command, holds investigative and operational authority. Local government structures like the Oorelope Council under Chairman Jacob Ogundiran have a coordinating and community liaison role, but no enforcement power. Traditional rulers like the Alegbata of Igboho land hold moral and customary authority, real but not constitutional in the sense of policing power. Sunday Igboho occupies none of those positions, and yet by Saturday night he was the one issuing ultimatums, naming suspects' alleged hideouts and publicly warning a divisional police officer against collecting blood money, a direct on-camera accusation of complicity against a serving officer. This is the ambiguity worth sitting with. In a security environment where kidnapping for ransom has become routine in parts of the Southwest, who actually has functional authority, the institutions with legal power or the individual with public trust and a viral platform? The Oyo Police Command's own response gives us the answer they'd prefer. They confirmed they had opened an investigation into Igboho's ultimatum video, not as a rescue operation, but as a potential threat. That detail deserves attention. The police's first institutional response to this story was not, "We are pursuing the kidnappers Igboho named." It was, "We are investigating the man who threatened them." Whether that's appropriate caution around vigilante rhetoric or institutional defensiveness against being upstaged is something we'll let you weigh, but it tells you where the state currently sees the threat. Then came the second institutional contradiction. After videos of celebration spread, residents singing, dancing, calling the victims free, both Chairman Ogundiran and the police command issued near identical denials within hours of each other. The claims were false and misleading. The victims remained in captivity, and there was no evidence Igboho had any role in securing anyone's freedom. Two separate arms of local and state authority moving in the same direction against a narrative that had already gone viral and that a community had already celebrated. That's not a small institutional failure to communicate. That's a credibility gap between what people saw and believed on their phones and what the people legally responsible for the case are willing to confirm. Let's talk about who this moment serves, regardless of whether the release claim turns out to be true. If the release narrative holds, if it's later confirmed that pressure from Igboho's ultimatum actually moved the needle, this becomes a significant moment in his ongoing positioning as Southwest Nigeria's most visible non-state security actor. Igboho has spent years cultivating an image as the man who acts when the state hesitates, from his earlier confrontations over alleged Fulani herder violence to his Yoruba nation agitation. A confirmed, viral, successful intervention, one without a single naira paid in ransom, would be the single most powerful piece of evidence for that brand he could ask for. It would also, not incidentally, strengthen his standing heading into any future political re-entry, however that materializes. If the release narrative collapses, if police are right and the celebration was premature, the political cost lands differently, but it still lands. It becomes a cautionary story about how fast unverified claims can travel in a security vacuum, and it raises uncomfortable questions about why a community was willing to believe a private citizen's intervention before it believed or even waited for official confirmation. That's not really a story about Igboho's credibility being damaged. If anything, it's a story about the state's credibility being so depleted that residents defaulted to celebrating before verifying. Who loses either way? The Oyo State Police Command. In version 1, they are outperformed by a private citizen. In version 2, they are stuck publicly correcting a viral narrative they didn't control after the fact, in a tone that reads as defensive rather than authoritative. Neither version is good for an institution that needs the public to trust its operational claims over social media virality. Who else is conspicuously positioned here? The Fulani community leaders Igboho directly addressed and implicitly held collectively responsible. Whether or not specific individuals were involved in this abduction, the framing, "all the Fulanis in this town should contribute that money," assigns collective financial and moral liability to an entire ethnic community for the alleged actions of a few. That is a political and social cost regardless of how the kidnapping case resolves, and it's worth naming directly rather than softening because it's central to understanding the second-order and third-order tension this story creates. And there's a quieter signal worth flagging. The swiftness and coordination of the local government and police denial, issued together in similar language within roughly a day of the celebration videos, suggests this wasn't an accident of timing. It reads as a deliberate joint effort to reassert institutional authority over a narrative that had slipped entirely into Igboho's hands. Strip away the specific names, and this is a story playing out in dozens of Nigerian communities. Kidnapping has become routine enough that ransom negotiation almost feels procedural, and trust in state security response has eroded to the point where a viral video from a private citizen can outcompete an official police statement for public belief, even temporarily, even before any denial arrives. That erosion has a federal-state dimension. Internal security and policing remain centrally controlled under Nigeria's current constitutional structure, which means a state government and its police command have limited independent capacity to reassure a community like Igboho's that protection is coming. When that capacity gap is visible, when residents are celebrating an unconfirmed private rescue rather than waiting on a police operation, it adds to the broader argument already circulating in Southwest political discourse for state policing structures with more localized accountability. There's an economic layer too, even at this local scale. A reported ransom demand that opened at 300 million naira and settled at 150 million naira is not abstract. It's a number large enough to be financially devastating for an ordinary family, and normalized enough to negotiating it down is treated as a routine community responsibility rather than an extraordinary crime. That normalization itself is a data point about how embedded the kidnapping economy has become in parts of rural southwest Nigeria. And then there's the tension this story sits directly on top of: Yoruba-Fulani relations in the southwest, particularly around land, settlement, and accusations of herder-linked criminality. This incident, regardless of how the facts ultimately settle, adds another data point to a regional narrative that's already combustible. For ordinary Nigerians, especially those without the means to relocate or self-protect, stories like this one don't read as abstract politics. They read as a measure of whether the place they live is becoming less safe and whether anyone with actual authority is going to do something about it before a private citizen has to. For the diaspora audience watching this in the UK, the US, Canada, and across the Gulf and South Africa, this story lands inside a familiar and unfortunately recurring pattern: Nigeria's kidnapping for ransom economy, which has shaped how diaspora families think about visiting home, where elderly relatives can safely live, and how much they budget, quietly, for emergencies that should never need budgeting for in the first place. It also connects to a broader continental conversation about the credibility gap between state security institutions and informal or community-based protector actors, a dynamic visible well beyond Nigeria, from vigilante responses to banditry in parts of the Sahel to community self-defense movements elsewhere on the continent. When formal institutions can't consistently deliver, informal authority fills the space, and that shift in legitimacy is one of the more consequential, underreported stories in African governance right now. For international observers and Nigeria watchers, this small incident is a telling data point in the ongoing assessment of state capacity in Nigeria's security architecture, relevant to everything from foreign investment risk calculations to bilateral security cooperation discussions. The strongest case for taking the release celebration seriously, even with the official denial on record, goes like this. State institutions in Nigeria have a documented pattern of denying inconvenient developments reflexively, sometimes to manage public perception, sometimes because local and state lines of communication are genuinely poor, and sometimes because acknowledging a private citizen's success would itself be an admission of institutional failure. Residents who turned out to celebrate weren't necessarily gullible. Many were responding to what they believed in the moment was credible local information, possibly including direct contact with affected families. That possibility deserves real weight before we dismiss the celebration as simply premature. The strongest case for trusting the police and council denial is similarly straightforward. Neither the Oorelope LG chairman nor the police command had an obvious incentive to fabricate a denial that makes them look worse, not better. Admitting the victims are still in captivity and we don't know who released this claim is not a flattering statement to issue. Institutions don't typically volunteer information that highlights their own continued failure to resolve a case, unless the alternative, letting a false claim stand uncorrected, was judged to be worse, including the risk of triggering real unrest if Fulani residents were held responsible for a release that, in the disputed version, never actually involved kidnappers standing down at all. The most common misconception circulating online right now treats this as a simple binary. Either Igboho is a hero who succeeded where police failed, or he's a reckless actor whose video has now triggered a formal investigation against him. Both readings skip past the actual unresolved question, which is factual, not characterological. Are the victims free or not? That has not been authoritatively answered as of this recording, and any framing that picks a side before the facts are settled is doing advocacy, not analysis. What does this mean specifically for Nigeria's democratic trajectory and its ordinary citizens? It means the space between what the state confirms and what the public believes is widening, and that space is where misinformation, ethnic scapegoating, and vigilante justice all tend to grow fastest. Watch for three things in the days ahead. First, whether the Oyo State Police Command issues a follow-up statement either confirming a rescue has now genuinely occurred or providing evidence of continued captivity. Silence beyond a few more days would itself become a story about institutional transparency. Second, whether Igboho responds directly to the police investigation opened against his ultimatum video, and whether that response escalates the standoff or walks it back. Third, watch the Fulani community leaders he addressed directly. Any public statement from them or from broader Fulani community associations in the southwest will tell us whether this incident hardens into a wider ethnic flashpoint or stays contained as a single community dispute. This de-escalates if the victims are confirmed safe through verified police action in the next several days, if no further public targeting of the Fulani community in Igboho occurs, and if Igboho and the police avoid a direct legal confrontation over the ultimatum video. It escalates if the captivity claim is confirmed accurate days after a town already celebrated a false release, a scenario that would likely intensify both public anger at security failures and pressure on Igboho to act further, possibly outside any legal framework. 12 months out, the more durable story here may not be about this single family at all. It may be about whether incidents like this accelerate the push for state policing reform in the Southwest, and whether private citizens with platforms continue to fill the authority vacuum left by under-resourced and under-trusted state security institutions. 3 years out, the question is structural. Does Nigeria's security architecture evolve to close that legitimacy gap, or does the gap simply get filled community by people like Igboho, accountable to no one but their own following? So, were the victims actually released? As of this recording, we genuinely don't know, and we want to be honest with you about that rather than pretend the viral version is confirmed fact. What we do know is this: a community celebrated before the state confirmed anything, and the state's first public instinct was to investigate the man who made the threat, not to update the public on the rescue. That gap between belief and verification is the real story tonight, more than any single ultimatum. We're not going to hand you a tidy prediction dressed up as certainty. What we'll say is this: however this particular case resolves, it has already told us something true about where public trust in Nigeria currently sits. Tell us what you think in the comments, and if there's a verified update before our next upload, we'll address it directly. If this gave you clarity, not agreement, clarity, share it with someone who needs to understand what's actually unfolding here. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.